let's discuss the language proficiency and its relationship with that of developing student skills in second language reading. So, to what extent language learning can be acquired through reading, or what's the relationship between reading and writing or speaking? So now let's look at some of the key issues related to this topic. And by the end of this module, what I want you to become aware of as language teachers, how we should see a language proficiency for successful reading. So language proficiency is given much importance in second language acquisition and English language teaching, that successful reading actually rests upon language proficiency. In other words, if you want to develop successful readers in English, you need to develop their linguistic proficiency in terms of acquiring vocabulary, in terms of becoming aware of some syntactic structures and their usefulness in paragraphs or larger texts. So this is how it's seen as important way to improve language proficiency. So these two things, reading and language proficiency and reading, are seen integral. Both rest on each other. They are seen as reciprocal. So in this regard, we've got the notion of intensive reading. You might remember we have already done what means by intensive reading, what are its principles. Let me just repeat. Intensive reading means the reading which is done within the classroom, which is guided by the teachers, and it has its benefits in terms of developing students' language proficiency. For example, teacher might give some close passages, some comprehension passages, or some pair of words worksheets. So in this way, students will become aware of the functional use of the language in sentences, in paragraphs, or in larger texts. So this is how their language proficiency will be increased. And on the other hand, we've got the notion of the concept of extensive reading. And extensive reading provides, of course, input. And when we talk about input, the very name of Krashen comes to our mind. Krashen argues that if we want to develop students' language proficiency, they need to have comprehensible input which is understandable, which is meaningful, which they can internalize. So this is how the reading passages which should be selected for second language teachers should be meaningful and understandable. So, but as regards the notion of extensive reading, we've got like some conflicting point of view, some uneven debates. And some studies suggest that they can pave the way for incidental vocabulary when students are reading some books outside the classroom. By extensive reading means the reading done by the students on their own without some guided instruction. So that might be helpful in developing incidental vocabulary, but it's important not to overlook the significance of individual factors. For example, some students might be motivated or some might be anxious. So these individual factors are important while teaching reading, while developing language proficiency through reading. So we need to look at, as language teachers, how the anxiety, how motivation, how aptitude, how individual differences, even economic backgrounds, even socio-cultural backgrounds can be at play while developing students' linguistic proficiency. So We've got like extensive reading, as I have said, that it can be useful in terms of developing students' vocabulary, students' language proficiency. And we've got this argument by Hafiz and Tudor that effects of extensive reading can be positive in terms of developing students' writing proficiency. We will discuss this writing element in the second half of this course when we'll take up how to teach writing. So, as language teachers, you need to be aware of this fact that while we are choosing texts for reading for our students, we need to be cautious in terms of selecting texts which are simplified or which are simple, which are not too difficult for the students. If the texts are too difficult for the level of the students, they might be thrown back. They might to use dictionaries, or they might feel interrupted. So extensive and intensive reading, they have their benefits in terms of developing students' vocabulary and syntax. So language proficiency and reading are important and integral. So they coexist, they work like side by side. And if we want to develop students' language proficiency, we need to develop their reading habits.